You've got some really great facilitators today, Rick Kegel, Alex Rixey, Jim Klein. They're going to take you through some fun and informative questions here. Odessa mentioned she hailed from Laurel, Maryland. I just want to say I'm a Bowie person, and I think that we might have a Bowie representative on with us today. So have fun with that. I don't want to take up any more time unless someone wants to raise a hand if they're having any trouble getting into our roadways breakout. Okay. Okay, I think we have everyone here. I'll hand it over to Rick Kegel then.
Great, thank you, Joy. Oh, thank you for the slide already. That's great. Exactly what I was hoping to see. So thanks everybody for joining the Roadways Breakout Group. I'm Rick Kegel with RK&K. My responsibility for the master plan update is roadways, streets, and highways, not including scenic and historic roads. Jim Klein on our breakout call this afternoon will be talking to you about that. What I wanted to do initially is remind you of really what we're building on, and that is the 2009 MPOT. Specifically, Chapter 6 is the chapter focusing on streets, roads, and highways. And I wanted to give you a little sense. Well, first off, this document is easily available to anyone by searching it on Google. Just search for MPOT, Prince George's County, 2009, or any variation of that. And you should get some links that will allow you to download any of the chapters or various sections of the document. So specifically on Chapter 6, I wanted to sort of very briefly outline for you what was done in the 2009 report. Essentially, it was broken into 3 sections. The introduction really identified the various types of roadways and the levels of service and offered some graphics on level of service. Many of you have seen those before. And then the other 2 sections are the complete streets section, in which there was a goal established and 5 policies and strategies that were in place to try to achieve that goal. The last section was the conservation and enhancement of special roads, specifically scenic and historic roads. It too had its own goal, and sections on historic and scenic roads, parkways, scenic byways, and so on. There were, 4 policies and strategies developed for that. So again, I encourage you to take a look at the download of this chapter when you get a chance and read through it. Most of the document, or most of the chapter, I should say, is dedicated to 2 tables known as Tables 4 and Table 5 in the document. Table 4 on the next slide is what I'd like to go over with you very briefly. Table 4 is the one that really defines most of the typical roadways, the freeways, expressways, arterials, collectors, and so on. It identifies a right-of-way width and a number of lanes anticipated for that roadway section. Specifically, what I want to draw your attention to here, first is that this is one page of, I think, 10 or 12 pages of Table 4. So it's very, very thorough and all-encompassing with respect to all of the roads in the county that we're looking at. And then Table 5 is a separate table which looks at the special roads. On this table, before we get into some questions, I would like to draw your attention to the section under arterials, specifically A1, which is the first one. This is an example of a roadway within the county, Arterial Maryland 198, where under the 2009 master plan, it was listed there as a single line with a range of right-of-way width and 4 lanes set for the number of lanes. So what we are looking to do for the update is to enhance and provide a lot more information on that road in particular, as well as any of the others that have the ranges or ranges in the right-of-way width or the ranges in the number of lanes. I anticipate working with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission to really break this down and identify specifically which segments are, as in the case of Maryland 198, 120-foot wide right-of-ways. Does it vary? Are there any variations of that width between 120 and 150? And then where that 150 is as well. I anticipate maybe not so much on Maryland 198 because it is suburb to suburb, but on many of these roadways, I can see the variations occurring really through the various land uses and densities in the county, starting with the urban settings, moving to suburban, and then to rural. Some of those longer roads in the county will see a variety of right-of-way widths for those various land uses. And so again, that's really the key element on the tables that I think we'll be breaking out for the 2035 report. All right, we now have a variety of questions. There are 3 for the roadways. Once we get through these 3 in Slido, I'll turn it over to Alex Rixey, who will talk about a few elements, and then he'll turn it over then to Jim Klein, who can talk about the special roads as well. So specifically on the roadways, the 3 questions, the first one here is, what roadway elements and factors has Prince George's County seen since 2009, and that is since the 2009 MPOT, that would impact the recommendations in this new MPOT? So I encourage you to use Slido with the hashtag roadways and enter some thoughts here now. If you're having trouble with Slido, I'm not getting any responses. Joy failed to mention earlier on, and I think, I'm not on it myself, but I think you have to go up to the top of the screen and switch events, and then type in the hashtag roadways as a new event for this session.
Yeah, and I'd add, we'd love to have your input through Slido, but also if you just want to chime in with your thoughts, we can have a little bit of a discussion here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. Yes, if you want to, you're welcome to go off mute here, and we could turn this into more of a conversation. I'm happily able to do that. So the one element that's come up so far, federal infrastructure dollars, and I'm sure that's related to the recent passing of the infrastructure bill and signing just 2 days ago. So we're hoping that all of the local jurisdictions, the county, as well as the state, will see a great influx of federal dollars to help advance any number of these projects. So accidents, I'm guessing that the individual who wrote accidents has seen an increase in accidents in the county, and our master plan should be cognizant of that and try to develop safe designs for our roadways. Electric vehicle goals, that's good. Whoever said that, why don't we have a brief conversation for a minute here, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Are you talking about charging stations or what?
Yes, this is Joe Minert. Just the entire emphasis now at all levels to increase the number of charging stations, to try to promote the purchase of EVs, changing some of the fleet vehicles to EVs. So it's that entire emphasis. Okay, great. Do you think that'll change the specifics related to, I guess, the roadway configuration? Do you think there'll be more or less cars on the road? That's hard to say, because if people just switch from gas vehicles to electric vehicles, you're still going to have the vehicles on the road.
Agreed. Yes, I agree. All right, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to ask to move to the next slide, please.
Could I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, please. Absolutely. Go ahead, Joe.
Autonomous vehicles. A lot of people have said, what's the role of autonomous vehicles in the future? And I personally don't see that happening for the average commuting vehicle, maybe for some larger fleet vehicles or trucking. But that's another topic that maybe this plan needs to look at.
Okay. Very good. We're going to move on to the second question. Which corridors are experiencing the greatest change and why? Again, we're thinking back from 2009 up to today, 2021, well, the end of 2021. Okay, Maryland 301 is a major north-south spine on the east side of the county. .301 and 210, yes.
Rick, maybe as the answers come in, I'll just mention again, it looks like this is consistent with what we saw just yesterday in our last meeting. And so I just wanted to let everyone know that the 301 corridor specifically is going to be studied as part of this plan, given that the county does anticipate the growth expected in that corridor.
Great, thank you. Yes, I was thinking in my head which section of the county, but 301 coming from Annapolis, it really goes through the central and south sections of the county. It doesn't encroach into the north, but I think Maryland 3, which is in a sense the continuation north up to I-97, that is probably also seeing a heavy amount of commercial and residential growth through Bowie.
Can I just make an observation?
Yes, please, Glenn.
In light of what you just said, a lot of people that I've interacted with over the years do not realize that that US 301 coexists with Maryland, with US 50. Most people think, at least within Prince George's County, that 301 stops at Bowie and that's the end of it. But so we have to make sure we include the portion that coexists with US 50 when we talk about US 301 within
Absolutely.
the county.
Yes, very good, very good. As we all know, 301 splits with 50 over in Queenstown and then continues north up to Delaware. So yes, 301 is definitely continuing and sharing a good portion with Route 50. Thank you. All right, let's hit the last question. I'm sorry, last questions for the roadway portion. Are any new corridors being considered, and what is driving the need for these? Specifically, I'm curious about any corridors that may not have appeared in the 2009 tables that are advancing because of additional development or potentially increases in density, thereby needing some additional capacity out there. Okay, I guess Prince George's County is fairly well built out in terms of the roadways. Maryland 193, is that whoever wrote that? Is that indicative of a new corridor? Is Maryland 193 proposed to be extended? Whoever wrote that comment, Maryland 193, do you have any additional thoughts?
Sorry, I had my microphone turned off.
That's
I was just saying, it seems like the traffic volumes have picked up, and I'm talking in the pre-pandemic years. And so it may be time for the state to look at this corridor and see what improvements might be needed as more developments are occurring.
Okay. Do you see that more up around Greenbelt area in the northern, where it really runs east-west, or south of Route 50 down toward 214?
Pretty much the entire corridor,
Okay.
but yes.
All right, good. Well, we'll keep that in mind for sure. Thank you very much. I think at this point we'll turn it over to Alex, who has some additional thoughts.
All right, thanks. So we just talked about roadways generally. I think one of the other things that we'll be looking at as a team is this concept of the high congestion, low transit corridors. And so we'll be doing some quantitative analysis using the travel demand model and doing an evaluation of the corridors to see which are suitable for transit. And so these high congestion, low transit corridors will be the ones that have high existing and expected levels of congestion, and that also aren't well suited for conventional fixed route transit, likely bus transit, as a solution. So those are corridors where we're going to have to get a little bit more creative about how we address them. And so if we could go to the next slide, we just have a question on based on your experience and any feedback that you've received, are there specific corridors that we should consider specifically for this idea of high congestion, low transit corridors? I heard a few called out earlier in general as corridors 193, 197, 301, Maryland 4. But if there are any others we should be thinking about specifically in this high congestion, low transit context.
Alex, I think yesterday we also heard about Maryland 210 and the lack of quality transit from National Harbor to the metro system, metro rail system.
That's right, yeah. Okay, I see US 301 grade separation. Is that a project that's ongoing or proposed, or is that just an idea at this point?
This is Joe Minert with the city of Bowie, and I didn't type the entire thing out there, but I was going to say in Bowie, there is a concept plan from Maryland Route 197 up to US 50 to grade separate that area. And it's the commercial portion of the sort of the center of Bowie along 301, and having that grade separation is really important to allow the through traffic to not mingle with the local traffic, and you'll be able to connect both sides of 301 at that point and actually serve with effective transit by getting that through traffic out of the traffic stream. So this is a real, I think this applies directly to your area of emphasis being low transit and high congestion area. And we've been told that the businesses in Bowie may suffer in the future because of the tight congestion that's expected to occur there in the future.
Okay, thanks for that information. And yeah, I want to make sure that Jim Klein has time for his next question. I think we have until about 2:09, so maybe we just take a couple more minutes here. If there aren't any other corridors folks want to call out, if there are any other ideas for solutions, we'll be coming up with some as well, but wanted to get thoughts from the group on ideas for addressing corridors that don't have good transit options and are experiencing high congestion. Any other thoughts? Hasn't been so much in person these days, but I feel like if I go to a party or something and tell people I'm in transportation, they say, you know what you should really do here is. Okay, well, hearing none, maybe we can go ahead and move over to Jim Klein on the scenic and historic roadways. Thanks for all the input, everybody.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Jim Klein. I'm with Lardner Klein, and my role on this team is to address the probably the opposite end of the high congestion, low transit corridors, is the low volume roads like this one that are designated as scenic or historic in the county. And there are close to 400 miles of these roads that people have figured out ways to get so designated. There's also some state level designations and a national historic trail that are increase the interest in some of these routes for heritage tourism and other things. People also like to bicycle on these roads, especially like the one you see here, and an example of one, which is Queen Anne Bridge Road in the eastern part of the county. So we're going to go and inventory all these scenic and historic roads, as well as look at the criteria that's used for designation and try to address in some ways some of the management issues and safety issues that some are born. Next, we can just go to the next slide. Yeah. So one we would like to really know more about is sort of your interest in these types of roadways. Yesterday we heard almost all questions related to the safety of those roadways. Prince George's County actually back in the 90s, I think, was one of the first, maybe the first county in Maryland to adopt kind of context-sensitive solutions guidelines for how to address safety issues while preserving some of the historic or scenic features of these roads. So what, in your communities or areas of interest, what specific issues should be addressed in the update for the MPOD as part of these scenic and historic road designations? And I'll open that up. You can also just speak out as well, since we have maybe 7 more minutes. Prince George's, every road in Prince George's has some scenic interest in it, some historic interest if you look hard enough. But these are the ones that are so gone forward enough to get them designated. Safety, again. It's interesting that safety comes up as a huge issue on these roads, and I wonder if we could kind of delve deeper into that in terms of what some of the safety issues are. Is it the speed people travel? Is it the mix of turning movements like that driveway you see, an entrance to a subdivision coming in and out of the things? Are there specific issues that come up in your minds for these types of roads? We have an enthusiastic bicycle safety. There you go. Yeah, those are great roads to bicycle on. Clubs use them all the time. That shoulder doesn't look quite wide enough there for people. If a car goes by, that becomes an issue. But if you widen the road, then even to add shoulder pavement, does that address the scenic or historic qualities of it?
Jim, I'm wondering if view shed is really an issue. I mean, we hear about all these developments coming in, and a scenic road will become less scenic if you can look through some of the trees and see these big developments.
Yeah, that's a good question, Rick. And I think the county does preserve sort of roadside vegetation as part of the scenic road implementation. That's a really important thing. And so, but it's only about a 35, I think it's a 35-foot wide buffer for most new developments. So it's not a real wide buffer. But the roadside trees are very important to many people on them, and that's why they designate them. And there's a quantifying safety, so how do you, that's a really good question, because I wonder if you looked at the crash statistics, whether or not proportionally scenic and historic roads that maybe lower traffic volumes, whether there is really a greater rate of safety issues than on other roads that are higher volumes. So that's a really good point there. It might be more of a perception than an actual concern, an actual statistical issue, both of which are important.
Jim, are there different sorts of AASHTO standards related to things such as guardrails on historic roads that would have an influence on safety or the location of roadside trees?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of flexibility built into all standards, and most of the work done on scenic or historic roads is in the 3R version of the work, road rehabilitation, resurfacing, those kinds of things. And those do have slightly different standards that are recognized that you're never going to achieve sort of the higher standards of a new road, so that there is flexibility inherent in that, so you don't want to put new trees in the middle of, right up against the clear area, but certainly ones that exist now, there are ways that you can address that. And so those types of standards are really spelled out well in the original version of the Prince George's County guidelines. They do have.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I encourage anyone on the call here to join in the conversation, certainly.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Glenn, we can.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll come clean. I was the perpetrator who put the quantifying safety.
All right.
And just to piggyback on that question of how do you quantify something that is subjective, the same could be said about scenic. Who or what are the metrics for determining how scenic something is or isn't? And so more broadly speaking, whenever we're dealing with issues that are obviously terms of art, such as scenic and safety, it lends to sometimes more debate than I care for, because there is no definitive declarative solution on those subjective issues.
That's a
So
really good point. Go ahead.
This is Joe Minert with the City of Bowie, and I agree with what Glenn just said, and I was going to reference something that was said a few minutes ago about areas that were kind of undeveloped and then became developed. And I think a lot of these roads were classified as scenic roads just because they were undeveloped. And over time, as areas do develop, you kind of lose that scenic quality. And if there was no foundational principle in the beginning as to why the road was scenic, you know, if it was only scenic because it was undeveloped, then really you're designating a road without a real legitimate purpose. So maybe going forward, the consideration in this plan ought to be to document or justify or provide a rationale for each scenic road and what those variables are that make it scenic, so that there won't be any question about what you need to do in the future if the area develops.
That's a great point, Joe. Thank you. And I think that's one of our charges, is to really look at those new designations. I think it would be pretty difficult in some ways to de-designate something that has lost its scenic value, but because of the original reasons it was designated have changed. But that may be a factor that should be considered for new ones, for sure. Great, we have another minute. Anybody else? I appreciate that. I'm gonna, there we go. One last question. Anything else regarding roadways that you want to discuss? And I'll flip it back to Rick.
Yeah, thank you. And you can just go off mute and continue the conversation here. We've probably got less than a minute, and we're going to just be kicked out of this call without any notice, right back into the other one. And so again, speak up now, and if not, we'll see you back in the main room.
I haven't heard anybody really mention anything to do with Westphalia. And it used to be just a couple years back there, you couldn't breathe without hearing Westphalia coming. And, you know, is that a major portion of planning? Is that a corridor in itself?
there's a Maryland, well, obviously the Maryland 4 corridor is the corridor that affects Westphalia the most.
Right.
And it's a huge problem, and it's only going to get worse. I'm not sure how much more expansive you need me to be, given the time we have left, but things are not.
I didn't hear it in the discussion, and since we're bringing everything up here at the end, that was all.
I did mention that Maryland 4 corridor needs some looking into.